These are the final resting places of 40 politicians whose decisions shaped nations, whose voices moved millions, and whose legacies continue to influence the world long after their graves were sealed. Winston Churchill was buried at St. Martin's Church in Bladon, England, after he died from a stroke in January 1965 at age 90 in his London home following days in a coma. The British Prime Minister who led the United Kingdom through World War II and delivered some of history's most stirring speeches died peacefully surrounded by family. He was laid to rest after a massive state funeral attended by representatives from 112 nations, with over 350 million people watching on television worldwide. His grave in the small village churchyard near Blenheim Palace, where he was born, that is marked by a simple headstone alongside his wife Clementine and their family members, a deliberately modest memorial for the man who saved Western civilization from Nazi tyranny. Margaret Thatcher was cremated after she died from a stroke in April 2013 at age 87 at the Ritz Hotel in London, where she had been staying since Christmas. The Iron Lady and Britain's first female Prime Minister had her ashes interred at the Royal Hospital Chelsea in London, after a ceremonial funeral with full military honors at St. Paul's Cathedral. Her funeral cost over £10 million and drew both admirers and protesters who lined the streets, reflecting the divisive legacy of a leader who transformed Britain's economy but left deep social scars. Her ashes rest beside those of her husband Dennis Thatcher in a plot within the hospital grounds, a final resting place chosen for its connection to the military she so strongly supported. Nelson Mandela was buried at his family homestead in Kunu, South Africa, after he died from a respiratory infection in December 2013 at age 95 in his Johannesburg home, surrounded by family. The anti-apartheid revolutionary and South Africa's first black president was laid to rest after 10 days of national mourning and a state funeral attended by world leaders from nearly 100 countries. His grave sits on the grounds of his childhood village in the Eastern Cape, overlooking the rolling hills where he played as a boy, marked by a simple headstone that bears his clan name, Madiba. The burial site has become a pilgrimage destination for millions who come to pay respects to the man who forgave his oppressors and unified a divided nation. Mahatma Gandhi was cremated after he was assassinated in January 1948 at age 78. Shot 3 times by Hindu nationalist Nathuram Godse during evening prayers in New Delhi. The father of Indian independence had his funeral pyre attended by over 2 million people who lined the streets of Delhi for his final procession. His ashes were divided into multiple portions and scattered in rivers throughout India and around the world, with the largest portion immersed in the confluence of the Ganges, Yamuna, and mythical Saraswati rivers at Allahabad. Some of his ashes remain enshrined at various memorials, including the Aga Khan Palace in Pune and the Gandhi Smriti in Delhi, where he was killed, allowing millions to pay respects to the man whose nonviolent resistance changed the course of history. Martin Luther King, Jr. was buried at Southview Cemetery in Atlanta, Georgia, after he was assassinated in April 1968 at age 39, shot by James Earl Ray while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. The civil rights leader was laid to rest after a funeral attended by 300,000 mourners, though his body was later moved in 1970 to the grounds of the King Center in Atlanta. His white marble tomb sits on a plaza surrounded by a reflecting pool inscribed with his words, free at last, thank God Almighty I'm free at last," from his iconic I Have a Dream speech. His wife, Coretta Scott King, was interred beside him in 2006, and the site has become one of the most visited graves in America, drawing millions who come to honor the man who gave his life fighting for equality. John F. Kennedy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia after he was assassinated in November 1963 at age 46, shot by Lee Harvey Oswald while riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas. The 35th president was laid to rest after a televised funeral watched by millions worldwide, with his widow Jacqueline lighting an eternal flame at his gravesite. He rests on a hillside overlooking Washington, D.C., flanked by his wife Jackie, who died in 1994, 2 infant children who died in infancy, and his brothers Robert and Ted Kennedy, who were buried nearby decades later. The eternal flame has burned continuously since 1963, and over 4 million people visit the grave each year to pay respects to the young president whose Camelot administration was cut short by an assassin's bullet, Robert F. And Kennedy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery just feet from his brother John after he was assassinated in June 1968 at age 42, shot by Sirhan Sirhan in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles after winning the California Democratic primary. The former Attorney General and presidential candidate died 26 hours after being shot and was laid to rest after a funeral train carried his body from New York to Washington, with thousands lining the tracks to pay respects. His grave is marked by a simple white cross and a small reflecting pool, and his widow Ethel and several of their children have since been buried in the family plot. The location next to his brother's grave symbolizes the tragedy of a family that gave so much to public service only to lose 2 of its brightest lights to assassins' bullets. Now, Abraham Lincoln was buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois, after he was assassinated in April 1865 at age 56, shot by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The 16th president who preserved the Union and ended slavery died the morning after being shot, and his body was carried across the country by train, with millions viewing his coffin during the journey. He rests in an elaborate tomb that was built with public donations, alongside his wife Mary Todd Lincoln and 3 of their 4 sons who predeceased him. The tomb was broken into by counterfeiters in 1876, who attempted to steal his body and hold it for ransom, leading to his coffin being encased in steel and buried under 10 feet of concrete to prevent future theft attempts. Franklin D. Roosevelt was buried at his family estate Springwood in Hyde Park, New York, after he died from a cerebral hemorrhage in April 1945 at age 63, while having his portrait painted at his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia. The 32nd president who led America through the Great Depression and World War II was laid to rest in the Rose Garden after a simple funeral, as he had requested, despite being the longest-serving president in American history. His wife Eleanor was buried beside him in 1962, and their graves are marked by simple white marble monuments surrounded by a hedge. Over 300,000 people visit the gravesite each year at the FDR Presidential Library, paying respects to the only president elected to 4 terms who transformed the role of federal government in American life. Theodore Roosevelt was buried at Young's Memorial Cemetery in Oyster Bay, New York, after he died from a coronary embolism in January 1919 at age 60 in his sleep at his beloved Sagamore Hill estate. The 26th president and Nobel Peace Prize winner, who embodied the vigorous life, was laid to rest in a simple grave marked by a plain headstone, reading only his name and dates, refusing any elaborate monument despite his larger-than-life persona. He rests beside his first wife Alice Lee, who died in 1884, and his son Quentin, who was killed in World War I, in a small cemetery overlooking Oyster Bay. The modest grave reflects his own wishes for simplicity, though the impact of the man who built the Panama Canal, won the Nobel Prize, and created America's national park system was anything but simple. Vladimir Lenin was embalmed and placed on display in a mausoleum in Red Square, and in Moscow after he died from a stroke in January 1924 at age 53, following a series of strokes that had left him incapacitated for the last year of his life. The Bolshevik revolutionary who founded the Soviet Union had his body preserved against his widow's wishes, with Stalin ordering the creation of an elaborate mausoleum, where Lenin's embalmed body has been on public display for nearly a century. His brain was removed and sliced into 30,000 sections for study at the Moscow Brain Institute, while his body undergoes regular maintenance every 18 months to preserve it. Millions have viewed his body over the decades, though debate continues in Russia about whether he should finally be buried or continue to lie in state as a communist relic. Joseph Stalin was buried in Lenin's mausoleum in Red Square after he died from a stroke in March 1953 at age 74 in his dacha after lying on the floor for hours before anyone dared check on him. The Soviet dictator responsible for millions of deaths was embalmed and placed beside Lenin after a massive state funeral, but his body was removed in 1961 during de-Stalinization. He was reburied in a simple grave behind the Kremlin Wall necropolis with a bust marking the spot, a dramatic demotion from lying beside Lenin. His grave receives few visitors compared to Lenin's mausoleum just meters away. As modern Russia grapples with the legacy of a man who industrialized the nation while murdering millions of his own people, Mao Zedong was embalmed and placed in a mausoleum in Tiananmen Square, in Beijing after he died from complications of Parkinson's disease in September 1976 at age 82 in his residence in the Forbidden City. The founder of the People's Republic of China and leader of the Cultural Revolution that killed millions had his body preserved despite his own wishes to be cremated, with the Communist Party deciding his corpse should be displayed as Lenin's was. His mausoleum was built in less than a year and opened in 1977, with his body lying in a crystal coffin that rises from an underground chamber each morning for public viewing. Despite the catastrophic failures of the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, over 1 million Chinese citizens still queue to view his body each year at the memorial hall that dominates China's most important public square. Adolf Hitler's body was burned by his staff in the garden of the Reich Chancellery in Berlin after he died by suicide in April 1945 at age 56, shooting himself in his underground bunker as Soviet troops closed in on the city. The Nazi dictator who caused World War II and the Holocaust killed himself alongside Eva Braun, whom he had married hours before, and both bodies were partially burned with gasoline in a shell crater. Soviet troops found the charred remains, which were secretly buried and exhumed multiple times before being completely cremated in 1970, with the ashes scattered in the Biederitz River. His lack of a grave was intentional to prevent any memorial site for neo-Nazis, ensuring the man responsible for 50 million deaths would have no place of pilgrimage. Benito Mussolini was buried at Predappio Cemetery in Italy after being executed by Italian partisans in April 1945 at age 61, while attempting to flee to Switzerland with his mistress Clara Petacci. The fascist dictator's body was hung upside down in Milan's Piazzale Loreto for public display before being buried in an unmarked grave, but neo-fascists stole his corpse in 1946. After the body was recovered, it was kept in various locations before being released to his widow in 1957, and he now rests in his family crypt in his hometown, where neo-fascists make annual pilgrimages. His tomb remains controversial, with some arguing it should be moved to prevent it from becoming a fascist shrine, while his hometown profits from the dark tourism his grave attracts. Charles de Gaulle was buried at the village cemetery in Colombey-les-Deux-Églises, in France after he died from a ruptured aneurysm in November 1970 at age 79 while watching television at his country home. The French general who led the Free French during World War II and served as president refused a state funeral and chose to be buried in his small village with a simple ceremony attended only by family and local villagers. His grave is marked by a simple cross bearing only his name and dates, though a separate massive Cross of Lorraine monument stands nearby to honor his memory. Despite his wish for simplicity, over 400,000 people visit the cemetery each year to honor the man who restored French pride and independence after the humiliation of Nazi occupation. Yitzhak Rabin was buried at Mount Herzl in Jerusalem after he was assassinated in November 1995 at age 73, or shot by right-wing extremist Yigal Amir after speaking at a peace rally in Tel Aviv. The Israeli Prime Minister and Nobel Peace Prize winner, who had signed the Oslo Accords, died during surgery after being shot in the back and chest. He was laid to rest after a funeral attended by world leaders, including President Clinton and King Hussein of Jordan, with his grave becoming a pilgrimage site for Israelis who support the peace process. His assassination by a Jewish extremist rather than an Arab militant shocked Israel and effectively ended the Oslo peace process, making his grave a symbol of the peace that might have been. Yasser Arafat was buried at the Muqatta compound in Ramallah after he died in November 2004 at age 75 under mysterious circumstances in a Paris hospital, with speculation he was poisoned, though this was never proven. The Palestinian leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner, who led the PLO for decades, was initially buried in a temporary grave at his compound because Israel refused to allow burial in Jerusalem. His body was exhumed in 2012 to test for polonium poisoning, but results were inconclusive, and he was reburied in a mausoleum at the same site. Palestinians consider him the father of their nation, while Israelis remember him as a terrorist, making his tomb both a shrine and a reminder of the conflict that continues decades after his death. Fidel Castro was cremated after he died from illness in November 2016 at age 90, after declining health for years following his resignation from power. The Cuban revolutionary who ruled the island for nearly 5 decades, had his ashes paraded across Cuba in a reverse journey of his 1959 revolution, before being buried in a simple ceremony in Santiago de Cuba. His ashes are interred in a large boulder in Santa Ifigenia Cemetery alongside Cuban independence heroes, with Cuban authorities refusing to reveal the exact location to prevent the grave from becoming either a shrine or target for vandalism. His death marked the end of an era for Cuba, with his legacy remaining divisive between those who see him as a revolutionary hero and those who remember him as a dictator. Hugo Chavez was buried at the National Military Museum in Caracas after he died from cancer in March 2013 at age 58 in a Venezuelan hospital after a long battle with the disease. The Venezuelan president who championed socialism and challenged American influence in Latin America had his body embalmed and placed on public display, with successor Nicolas Maduro announcing plans to build a mausoleum similar to Lenin's. His body was moved to the military museum, where it remains on display in a glass coffin, though the promised mausoleum was never completed due to Venezuela's economic collapse. Supporters still visit to view his body and pay respects to the leader they see as a hero of the poor, while critics blame his policies for the country's catastrophic decline. Anwar Sadat was buried at the Unknown Soldier Memorial in Cairo after he was assassinated in October 1981 at age 62. Shot by Islamic Jihad members during a military parade celebrating Egypt's crossing of the Suez Canal. The Egyptian president and Nobel Peace Prize winner, who made peace with Israel, died almost instantly from multiple gunshot wounds as assassins opened fire during the parade. He was laid to rest after a funeral attended by former presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter, though many Arab leaders boycotted to protest his peace treaty with Israel. His grave beneath the memorial pyramid became a symbol of the cost of peacemaking, as the leader who chose peace over conflict paid with his life at the hands of extremists who rejected reconciliation. Indira Gandhi was cremated after she was assassinated in October 1984 at age 66, shot by her own Sikh bodyguards in revenge for her ordering the military assault on the Golden Temple in Amritsar. The first female Prime Minister of India died from her wounds hours after being shot 31 times in her garden by 2 bodyguards who then surrendered. Her funeral pyre was lit by her son, Rajiv, on the banks of the Yamuna River, and her ashes were scattered by airplane across India from the Himalayas to the southern tip. Her assassination triggered anti-Sikh riots that killed thousands, adding to the tragedy of a leader who sought to hold India together, but whose controversial decisions led to her violent death. Rajiv Gandhi was cremated after he was assassinated in May 1991 at age 46 by a female suicide bomber from the Tamil Tigers, who detonated an explosive belt while greeting him at a campaign rally in Tamil Nadu. The Indian Prime Minister and son of Indira Gandhi died instantly along with 14 others in the blast that was captured on camera by a photographer who also died in the explosion. His remains were cremated and his ashes scattered in the Yamuna River, near where his mother and grandfather were cremated, continuing the tragic pattern of violent death in the Nehru-Gandhi political dynasty. His assassination while campaigning for re-election shocked India and effectively ended the Tamil Tigers' international support. Benazir Bhutto was buried at the family mausoleum in Garhi Khuda Bakhsh, Pakistan, after she was assassinated in December 2007 at age 54 by a suicide bomber who shot her and then detonated explosives after a campaign rally in Rawalpindi. The first female prime minister of a Muslim nation died from her wounds shortly after the attack, which also killed 20 others in the crowd. She was laid to rest after a funeral attended by hundreds of thousands, buried in the family graveyard alongside her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was executed in 1979. Her death came just weeks before elections she was expected to win, and conspiracy theories about who ordered the assassination persist to this day. Julius Caesar was cremated in the Roman Forum after he was assassinated in March 44 BC at age 55, stabbed 23 times by a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius on the Ides of March. The Roman dictator's body was burned on a pyre in the Forum as angry crowds rioted, and a temple was later built on the spot by his adopted son, Octavian. His ashes were reportedly placed in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, though their exact location was lost to history. And today, a pile of flowers often marks the spot in the forum where he was cremated. His assassination failed to save the republic he supposedly threatened, instead triggering civil wars that led to the empire under his heir Augustus. Leon Trotsky was cremated after he was assassinated in August 1940 at age 60, killed with an ice axe by Soviet agent Ramon Mercader in his home in Mexico City, where he lived in exile. The Bolshevik revolutionary, who had been Lenin's right hand but lost the power struggle to Stalin, died from his wounds the next day. His ashes are buried in the garden of his house in Coyoacan, which is now a museum with a large stone monument marked with the hammer and sickle. His assassination on Stalin's orders in distant Mexico showed the length Stalin would go to eliminate rivals. And his grave has become a pilgrimage site for socialists worldwide who see him as the revolution's martyr. Patrice Lumumba was killed in January 1961 at age 35, and his body was dissolved in acid by Belgian and Congolese collaborators after he was captured, tortured, and executed following the coup against his government. The first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Congo lasted only 67 days in office before being overthrown with CIA and Belgian support. His remains were destroyed to prevent a grave from becoming a rallying point for his supporters. And for decades, there was no burial site, though in 2022, Belgium returned a single tooth that had been kept as a trophy. A monument stands in Kinshasa to honor him. But his lack of proper burial symbolizes the tragedy of African independence betrayed by colonial powers who refused to let go. Salvador Allende died in the presidential palace La Moneda in Santiago during the military coup in September 1973 at age 65, officially ruled a suicide, though conspiracy theories claim he was murdered during the assault. The democratically elected socialist president of Chile was either killed or took his own life as the military bombed the palace, and his body was buried quickly in an unmarked grave in Viña del Mar. After democracy was restored, he was reburied with full honors in 1990 in Santiago General Cemetery, where thousands visit his tomb annually. And his body was exhumed in 2011 to confirm he died by suicide using an AK-47 given to him by Fidel Castro. Yet his death marked the beginning of Pinochet's brutal dictatorship and remains one of the darkest days in Chilean history. Che Guevara was buried in an unmarked mass grave in Bolivia after being executed in October 1967 at age 39 by Bolivian soldiers following his capture while trying to start a revolution. The Argentine revolutionary and guerrilla leader who fought alongside Fidel Castro was shot 9 times, and his hands were amputated as proof of death before burial. His body remained missing for 30 years until being discovered in 1997, and he was then reburied with full military honors at a mausoleum in Santa Clara, Cuba, where his remains rest alongside other guerrillas killed in Bolivia. His face became one of the most iconic images of revolution worldwide, appearing on millions of posters and t-shirts, making his mausoleum a pilgrimage site for leftists around the globe. Muammar Gaddafi's body was displayed in a commercial freezer in Misrata, Libya, after he was captured and killed in October 2011 at age 69 by rebel fighters during the Libyan civil war. The Libyan dictator who ruled for 42 years was found hiding in a drainage pipe and was beaten and shot by the mob, with his death captured on cell phone video that spread worldwide. His body, and those of his son and defense minister, were displayed for 4 days before being buried in a secret desert location to prevent the grave from becoming either a shrine or target. The location remains unknown, and Libya descended into chaos after his death, vindicating his warning that without him, the country would collapse into tribal warfare. Nicolae Ceausescu was buried in Ghencea Civil Cemetery in Bucharest after he was executed by firing squad in December 1989 at age 71, along with his wife Elena, following a hasty trial during the Romanian Revolution. The Romanian dictator and his wife were executed on Christmas Day after fleeing the presidential palace and were buried quickly in unmarked graves. After the fall of communism, Their bodies were exhumed in 2010 and reburied in market graves, which have become controversial pilgrimage sites for those who view the Ceausescus as martyrs despite their brutal dictatorship. Their execution was filmed and broadcast, making them among the only modern dictators whose deaths were shown on television. Francisco Franco was buried at the Valley of the Fallen monument near Madrid after he died from heart failure in November 1975 at age 82. Following weeks in a coma, as doctors tried desperately to keep the dictator alive. The Spanish generalissimo, who ruled after winning the Civil War, was interred in the massive underground basilica he had built, using forced labor from political prisoners. His body remained there for 44 years until being exhumed in 2019 and reburied in a family crypt in Madrid Cemetery, ending his place of honor at the memorial he had built to glorify his regime. The removal of his body was hugely controversial, with some arguing he deserved the honor and others saying a dictator should not be celebrated at a national monument. Augusto Pinochet was cremated after he died from heart failure in December 2006 at age 91. While under house arrest, facing human rights charges that he never lived to face trial for. The Chilean dictator, who overthrew Salvador Allende, had his ashes interred in a private ceremony at a memorial park in Santiago, against the wishes of thousands who protested his being given military honors. His family scattered some ashes in the ocean as he requested, fearing his grave would be vandalized, and his tomb has required constant security due to attacks by those who view him as a murderer. He died without being convicted for the thousands killed and tortured under his regime, escaping justice through his death. Oliver Cromwell was buried at Westminster Abbey after he died from malaria and kidney infection in September 1658 at age 59. But his body was exhumed, hanged, and beheaded in 1661 after the restoration of the monarchy. The Lord Protector, who ruled England after the Civil War, was initially given a state funeral, but Charles II ordered his corpse dug up and subjected to posthumous execution. His body was thrown into a pit, while his head was placed on a spike at Westminster Hall, where it remained for 24 years before blowing down in a storm, and it changed hands multiple times before finally being buried at Sidney Sussex College, Cambridge in 1960. His bizarre fate after death reflects the violent religious and political passions of his era. Napoleon Bonaparte was buried on the island of St. Helena after he died from stomach cancer in May 1821 at age 51 while in British exile on the remote South Atlantic island. The French emperor who conquered most of Europe was initially buried in a simple grave on the island, but his body was exhumed in 1840 and returned to France with great ceremony. He now rests in a massive red porphyry tomb under the Dome of Les Invalides in Paris, surrounded by captured battle flags and his marshals' tombs. Over 2 million people visit his tomb each year, paying respects to the military genius whose ambitions reshaped Europe and whose legal code still influences law worldwide. Simón Bolívar was buried at the cathedral in Santa Marta, Colombia, after he died from tuberculosis in December 1830 at age 47, broken and disillusioned as the South American nations he liberated descended into civil war. The liberator who freed 6 nations from Spanish rule was initially buried in the cathedral, but his remains were moved to Venezuela in 1842 and have been relocated several times since. He now rests in the National Pantheon in Caracas in an elaborate tomb. And though Hugo Chavez had his body exhumed in 2010 to investigate conspiracy theories that he was poisoned, DNA tests confirmed he died of tuberculosis, and he was returned to his tomb where thousands visit to honor the man who dreamed of a united South America that never came to be. David Ben-Gurion was buried at his kibbutz in Sde-Boker in the Negev desert after he died from a cerebral hemorrhage in November 1973 at age 87, having spent his final years in the remote desert settlement. The first prime minister of Israel who declared the nation's independence chose to be buried in the desert he worked so hard to develop, rather than in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. He rests beside his wife Paula in a simple grave overlooking the Zin Valley, with the isolation reflecting his belief that Israel's future lay in developing the desert. Thousands visit the gravesite each year, paying respects to the founding father who built a nation from desert and refugee camps. Golda Meir was buried at Mount Herzl in Jerusalem after she died from lymphoma in December 1978 at age 80. having served as prime minister during the Yom Kippur War. The former prime minister, known as the Iron Lady of Israeli politics, was laid to rest on the mountain where Israel buries its leaders and fallen soldiers, with her funeral attended by world leaders. Her grave sits among other Israeli leaders on the hillside overlooking Jerusalem, marked by a simple stone bearing her name. She remains one of the most significant female leaders of the 20th century, and her grave is visited by those who remember her strength during Israel's most challenging years.